Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Crossroads Church Austin. My name is Brady, and what a joy it is to welcome you to Church Online. So glad that you guys are tuning in each and every week. And if you're brand new today, what a great day to be here because we're starting a brand new series called What's After ATX. And here's the big idea of the series today. We're asking the question, what's after life? Another way of saying that is, what in the world happens after you die? Now, here's the really cool thing about this series. This series in particular, we are joining with dozens and dozens of other churches across Greater Austin, a part of a spiritual awareness campaign as the church, the Big C Church of Jesus Christ, comes together to share the gospel with those that we live, work, and play with. And one of the ways we're doing that is by asking this question that everybody is asked for generations upon generation is, what happens when you die? Like, is there life after death? Now, this series has been inspired by a bunch of pastors, Christ Together, Greater Austin, coming together saying, hey, how do we increase the spiritual temperature of our city? How do we reduce the lostness of men, women, and children who are part of our great city? And it comes from this book by John Burke, good friend here at Gateway Church in the city, called What's After Life. And he wrote this small booklet that really is just an excerpt of his book called Imagine Heaven. And I just want to encourage you to grab these resources. I brought some of the resources that I'm going to be using and are using today, but certainly over the course of the next 4 weeks in this 4-part series for us. And so welcome today to What's After Life, What's After ATX, as we explore the question of what comes after death. Now, as we jump in today, I want to start just with a story. One of my favorite places to go is Cabela's, right? The hunting store, or its cousin, Bass Pro Shops, right? I love going into Cabela's because there's so much to see. Whether you like camping, whether you like hunting or fishing or even guns, it's a great place to go. And every time I go into that store, right, I think about purchasing something that I'm going to use for a future activity. And it doesn't matter if you don't like hunting or fishing, but when I go in there and I grab a piece of hunting equipment, I'm always looking forward to the day that I'm going to get to use it, to that future event of going hunting. Now, whether you like camping or hunting or fishing or guns or any of that, here's what I know. Eventually, some of you are going to go shopping, right? Some of you are going to go grab some things to use them for a future activity. In fact, at this time in our lives, I think we're all looking forward to future activities in our life, whether it's a college football game this fall or going out on the boat skiing or, just thinking about running that marathon or the Cap 10K again or attending a soccer game. We're all looking forward to those future activities that we'll eventually get to join in. Now, here's the news flash I want to give everyone this morning. The big news flash is this, is that no matter your age, no matter your race, no matter your background socioeconomically, or even your political preference, the one thing that I know about you and I that we have a future date with is that every single one of us are going to die, right? Aren't you glad you woke up this morning? You made the journey from the bedroom to the couch to hear such good news. You're like, right, is he always this cheerful? Does he always bring such good news if you're brand new today? Here's the reality. Every single one of us we know is going to die. Now, here's the reality. We don't think about this a whole lot. But when we do, typically it's at a funeral of a loved one or a friend. In fact, this past week, I got to be a part of celebrating the life of one of our dear friends and our very own C.L. Evans here at Crossroads. And what a joy it is. What a beautiful reminder to look and to celebrate his life. And what that does is it causes us to reflect on our own lives about the fact that, hey, one day every single one of us are going to die. In fact, David said it well in Psalm 90. He said, hey, we may get 70, or if we live past our warranty, we may get 80 years. And as we look at the national averages of both men and women, we know, hey, we're going to get 76, 78, 79 years. But the reality of it is we're not guaranteed tomorrow. Some of us make it to 50 or 20 or 10 or even 1. Now, as we think about that, I think too many people in a naive way, too naively, try to convince themselves that if they just simply don't think about death, right? If they don't let it enter into their minds that all things will be fine. Now, here's what I would say to that. I think those men and women are living foolishly and dangerously. I think it's important that you and I think about from time to time, not in a morbid way, but in the reality kind of way, that death is coming for every single one of us. Now, here's what I believe. I believe that our world doesn't know what to do with death. You see, when people begin to die, we put them in retirement homes or assisted care facilities, or even they move to hospitals. And what happens is that we tuck them away out of sight, fill them with medications, and try to make death not seem so deadly. But here's the reality. When someone dies, we put them in a box so that we don't have to stare death in the face. And if the box is open, we see the deceased with makeup on, or we put the suit on or the pretty clothes so that they don't appear actually dead. And when our deceased is finally buried, we put them in a cemetery replete with flowers and all these furnishings that somehow gives the appearance, right? Maintains the illusion that death is not really an enemy. As Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 26. Now, not knowing what to say sometimes at the moment of death, the living who remain, we assert things like this. We say things like, hey, they're in a better place now, which, I mean, let's be honest, may be true or may not be true, or, hey, I'm so glad their suffering has ended. And here's the reality, whether they're repentant or not, we're not sure if their suffering has really ended unless they're a follower of Christ. But at some point, all of us, here's what we know. Every single one of you who hears my voice today is watching me this morning. What we know is that we will step into eternity. You will die. In fact, if you get nothing out of today, point number one, the big principle that I want to make for you this morning is just simply this. Eternity is a reality. Eternity is a reality for every single person. You see, it doesn't matter what religion you are, whether you're a Christian or not a Christian. And if you're watching today's broadcast and you're not a Christian, I'm really glad that you've tuned in. Or maybe one of your friends emailed this to you later in the week so you could watch it on demand as you ask the question, hey, what happens when you die? Or what happens after life? Here's the deal. If you don't agree with me, you have to, on everything else, you have to agree with me on the die part. Every single one of us will do that. That's the reality. Nobody can stop that. Now, we all try, don't we? Right? We all kind of push death aside, don't want to think about it. We're all fighting hard against us. I think especially during this season, as we think about, hey, our fear, our anxiety, our worry with the coronavirus, with all the precautions we've taken, as you think through that in the layers, when you keep asking why and you get to the bottom line, it's because, hey, we don't want to die. Or maybe we're fearful of dying. What happens after you die? Now, this is why some of you, right, you eat organically. All right, think about this for just a moment. I don't know if you like all the foo-foo grocery stores, but one time I went into Trader Joe's. I've only been in there one time, but it's kind of like a hipster grocery store. Anybody? You know what I'm talking about? They even have organic wine. Now, why in the world would you need organic wine? But I'm walking through this place and people are trying to eat better. You've got your organic people, you got your vegan people, you got your vegetarian people, and everybody's eating that way. When I say everybody, I'm not talking about me. It's not we, but I don't eat that. I like all the dead cow I can get, all right, just so you know that. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how we eat. We're all going to die, right? And here's the reality. I'm not against eating healthy. That's great. We should do that. I had poor diet this week, right? I went to Catfish Parlor and had like hush puppies fried, had French fries fried, had fried catfish, right? The only thing halfway green and not good for me on my plate was like coleslaw, right? And I felt that the next day. So we should eat well, but here's the deal. We work out, right? You go to Pilates, you go to the gym, you do CG, you do yoga, all those things. And I always love yoga, right? All those positions to breathe, because you see people who are like, I can put my hands flat on the floor with my knees or legs straight, right? And my rebuttal to that is, hey, I can eat a Butterfinger and die before you do and see Jesus, right? So I call that win-win on my behalf because I win on both ends of that. But at the end of the day, here's the deal. Whether you eat really well, whether you work out all the time, you might get 5 more years than me. And really, it's a lot of it's genetics, right? You see from time to time even a healthy person, a fit person, dropping dead of a heart attack. But here's the reality, no matter where you fall in all of that, is that eternity is a reality, right? Eternity is a reality. Now, here's the question that we're going to begin answering today. I'm not going to completely answer it today to probably your satisfaction and fulfillment, but I want to begin and we're going to unpack it over the next 3 to 4 weeks. And that's this question is, what's after life? What happens to you when you die? Now, here's the reality. Every religion across the board has something different that they believe. Think about this, Buddhism. Buddhism has this 8-fold path, right? The 8 practices that if you practice them one after another, eventually it leads to nirvana and kind of life ceases, right? That's Buddhism. That's their plan. Hindus, right? They believe that you get to come back and do it all over again and again and again. We call that reincarnation. Our Muslim friends, they believe that you appear before Allah in the judgment, and your judgment is based on your works, right? Did I do good? Did I do bad? And that is my judgment. And as followers of Christ, right? We believe that when you die, you step into eternity. Either you step into eternity with God forever, a place called heaven, or somewhere separated from Him forever, which we call hell. And the differentiating factor that moves you to heaven is a relationship with Jesus Christ, where a person puts their faith, they transfer their trust in the accomplished work of Christ, that He died for their sins on their behalf so that they could have eternal life. In other words, Jesus paid the price that we owed. He who knew no sin became sin on our behalf so that we might experience the righteousness of God. Now, here's what I want you to do today. I want us to focus primarily on the really good news. I want to focus on the good news so that when we come to the bad news in a few weeks, we can anchor ourselves in this good news of the truth that we're going to look at today. And so if you got a Bible, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, that's where we're going to be. I want to encourage you to grab your text this morning, and we're going to be in chapter 5. We're going to read 7 or 8 verses here. And as we go to the scriptures, here's what I want you to see. Paul is here. Before he was Paul, he was Saul. He wasn't following Jesus. He meets him in Acts chapter 9 on the road to Damascus, and it's a supernatural experience where he's introduced to Jesus. Paul becomes a Christian, and as he does that, he begins to start churches all over the Mediterranean. And specifically, he's talking here to a church that he had helped establish in Corinth. And lots of people are asking questions, right? As pastors, I get these questions all the time. They were seeing their loved ones die. They were seeing their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents dying. And so they had some questions about, hey, so Paul, what happens to you when you die? And so Paul begins to address this question as we do in this series about what's after life. Verse 1, Paul says, "For we know that if the tent, that is our earthly home, is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made by human hands, eternal in the heavens." Now, I just want to start right there with that first statement, for we know, right? Paul, he's writing to followers of Jesus, and he gives us this confident statement, for we know, as believers in Christ, we know that we hope and we dream and we imagine, right? We look forward to a day that we are going to be with Jesus when we check out of this earthly body, this earthly shell. And as a follower of Jesus, we can know, he says, with confidence that when we die, while this tent, this temporary body gives up on us, that there is life after death. Now, look what he says here. He says, for we know that if the tent, that is our earthly home, is destroyed. Now, I love the imagery that Paul uses here. The analogy is that of a tent. He compares our bodies to a tent. I love that because if you don't know this, Paul, in sort of his skill or his trade, the kind of way he funded his ministries outside of the churches, that he was a tent maker. And so he takes something very personal that he knows and he uses it to explain this life looking forward to the next. He says that if this tent, our earthly home, will be destroyed, right? Now, here's the illustration I want to give you this morning. You are a tent, right? Now, here's what I want everybody to do this morning. I want you to just turn to your neighbor, whoever you're watching with this morning, and if you're by yourself, this will be really awkward, but just turn to your neighbor and just look at them and say, hey, you're a tent. Tell your kids, you're a tent. Tell your mom and dad, hey, mom and dad, you're a tent. Maybe, right, if you're single and you're watching with a significant other, you might go, hey, you're a really good-looking tent. Or maybe your spouse and you guys could enjoy tent making together later, all right? Inside pastor jokes there. I'm sorry. I haven't gotten out in a long while, so just bear with me, right? How about this? We know this about tents. Tents are temporary. Anybody? Tents are temporary. Would you agree? In other words, tents don't exist forever. They dry rot, they break down, they tear, they get old, right? They get abused. Now, here's something you need to know about your pastor if you don't know this. I absolutely hate camping. Can I get an amen? Anybody? Anyone? Bueller? All right. Now, before you hate me or cast stones at the TV or send me a dirty email, right? I just hate camping and most everything to do with it, right? Now, here's what I know. Some of you love it. And I know what you're thinking. You're going, I'm just going to type him up an email and said, hey, if you just go camping with me, then it would all be wonderful and it would be good. Here's what I've never understood. Why in the world would you go with your family or friends and pretend to be homeless, all right, rather than going to a 5-star hotel? Anybody? Right? If I'm choosing the Four Seasons or the Ritz-Carlton 5-star hotel versus going camping, I'm choosing the hotel every single time. In fact, we'll just start a little debate here. In the comments below, to the side, wherever they're at, just say, hey, I'd rather go camping or I'd rather go to the 5-star hotel. Ready? Go. Start putting in your comments. We'll tally those up and we'll see which one of you are really spiritual people that think like me. All right? Now, again, if you love camping, don't send me an email this week telling me how awesome it is. I just know that growing up, I went camping a lot. So it's not that I didn't have the experience. In fact, I have 2 experiences that are etched in my mind forever, right? They were probably the most miserable experiences I can think of. I grew up in a tradition in a church that had a program called Royal Ambassadors, right? It was called RAs. And what RAs were is that it was just, hey, we are ambassadors of the King. We are royal ambassadors. And so it taught young men, kind of like 7 to 12 years old, how to be a missionary. And we studied missionaries and we studied how, the impact of the gospel going forward. And every year there was an RA camp out. And so there was like 100 little boys that would go out into the woods with like 2 sponsors and you would camp out. And so you see where this is going. I mean, it was a miserable experience. There was always rain, there was always water. And I remember the time we got there and they said, okay, go about 100 yards out, dig a hole, and that's where you do your business, all right? I was just like, bro, I'm tapping out here, okay? Not a good thing. Fast forward just 2 years ago, 10 or 11 years ago, my wife, about 2 weeks before her birthday, it's on a Halloween every year, she looks at me and says, honey, for my birthday, I want to go camping. And I'm like, okay, great. And secretly, behind the scenes, I'm smiling out here, but inside I'm going, oh, for the love of all that's holy, that's not what I want to do. But it's your birthday, not my birthday, so we're going to serve you. And so I had to call all the friends in the church, see who had camping equipment, get that stuff together, and we go camping. Well, this is one of the rare Halloweens, all right, that it got cooler, right? It wasn't 98 on Halloween in Texas, but it actually, the night we went camping, I secured a spot out at Inks Lake, so it was beautiful. Everybody knows it's gorgeous out there. We're on Inks Lake. That night, the temperatures dipped to about 30 degrees. Now, we're a family of 5. We're smushed into this tent. We thought it was a bright idea to actually bring the dog. We had one little bitty space heater, and we were during the prime season of potty training. Anybody feel me? You see where this is going, right? It's cold. You can see your breath. You got littles, right? And every time you make a noise on the air mattress, it pops up. And we were like Cadillac camping. This wasn't, like old school camping. And so we're doing our camping thing. And I remember about every 2 hours, one of the girls said, hey, I got to go to the bathroom. Now, at Inks, we were about a half a mile from the public restroom. And so what I had to do is I had to take each little girl out. They get ready, and I'm lifting them up. I'm holding them up and doing the hover mount so that they can go to the bathroom. All right, I'm telling you, by 7 a.m., the car was loaded, all right? We were in Burnett at Whataburger having taquitos. That's the last time we've been camping and probably the last time we will ever go, all right? So anyway, you're welcome. I'll just say that. And then here's what I'm reading, right? One day I'm reading, and I read in the scriptures, we are a tent. And this is what I see. Tents are temporary. Look at verse 1. We have a building from God, a house not made with hands, but built with human hands, eternal in the heavens. Now, eternal, this idea of being built by the hands of God, not with human hands. This is a great thought. You see, here's what I know. No matter how good the builder is of maybe your house, there's always a problem. But when God builds things, there's not a problem. You see, we have a home that's in the eternal heavens one day. We have a home in the heavens. Now, the next 2 weeks, we're going to talk about heaven. We're going to talk about hell. We're going to talk about how you get there. We're going to talk about, near-death experiences and the afterlife and people's experiences with those specific things as we talk about what's after ATX. Now, here's the reality. As we think about heaven, no one knows really for sure. You got guys like Randy Alcorn who've wrote a beautiful book and a great help to us to think about and imagining heaven. We read the pages of Scripture. We don't fully understand what it's going to look like. We do know this. It's going to be awesome, right? It's going to be incredible, built by not human hands, but the hands of God. Now, I think about this when I think about heaven. I'm excited. Excited from this standpoint, right? The opportunity that, there are 3 of my grandparents there ahead of me, believers in Jesus Christ, a couple of my great-grandparents, and also my stepfather, right? No longer a tent, no more suffering, no longer suffering with cancer, but is in heaven. And there's great comfort for me, right, as I think about that, is what I know about being built by the hands of God is that you and I never fall apart. This earthly shell may die, but ultimately we never fall apart. Now, here's the reality. Tents don't last, and neither do you. In fact, nothing on this earth holds up. We find that true, right? But there is a place for you built by God in a home called heaven that holds up forever. Now, let's look at verse 2. Verse 2, let's read it. Paul says, "For in this tent we groan." Now, everybody that's over 40 years old right there, right now, knows what this text is talking about, right? "Longing to put on our heavenly dwelling." Now, if you're over 40, you don't argue with that statement, right? If you've ever seen your grandparents try to get out of their chair in the living room or out of their special place that they sit, right? It's like they need a tow truck, right, to get out. It's like an Olympic sport trying to get out of the chair, right? Because it's so difficult, right? All the aches and pains and working out and doing things. Look at verse 3, all right? "If indeed by putting it on, we may not be found naked." All right, got to love verse 3. If you give me nothing else today, you got to love verse 3 because it says if we're clothed, we will not be found naked. And everybody said what? Amen. All your kids just said, the pastor said naked, right? On TV. Can you believe that? All right. Verse 4, here we go. "For while we were still," all right, "for while we are still in this tent, we groan, being burdened. Not that we would be unclothed, but that we would be further clothed, so that what is mortal may be swallowed up by life." You see, in this tent, we still groan and we're still burdened. You see, sin affects everything. Sin affects everything that we see, that we touch, and that we feel on this side of heaven. Now, as you think about that, I just reminded of the brokenness that we see in our lives. I'll never forget, as a late teenager, a young adult, watching my stepfather die. Now, when he died, he was 55 years old. Now, at the time, I thought, okay, that's kind of old. But at a 46-year-old man now, I'm going, 55 is super young. And it just begins to make you question as you get older, what really is old anymore? But here's what I know. I know that this tent, this earthly body, is tearing down. It will be torn down. Now, I'll just give you an illustration of that. How many 20-year-olds, healthy 20-year-olds do you know, have to get their eyes checked, their ears checked? How many 20-year-olds have a colonoscopy? How many of them have a prostate exam? Here's the reality, not many. But into your 40s, into your 50s, that's when stuff starts breaking down, and it happens, right? Now, when I was a kid, I remember, right, you could ride your bike all day long, right? From sun up to sundown, you could go until your mom or dad called you in. But now what happens? I pull a hamstring walking from the bed to the bathroom at night, all right? Life just changes. And here's what it says, because of that, we groan. And as we get older, eternity becomes a reality. Now, you see, when I turned 40, I quit thinking so much about what I was going to do with my life, and I started thinking about the time I had left. In fact, I remember in my late 30s that there were several close friends near me that began to die, some tragically and just some out of the blue. And what that did for me is it just kind of made me reflect, hey, I'm kind of at the midpoint, right? Nobody wants to think about that. Everybody thinks 30s are young, but at 38, right, 39, most men are at the midpoint of their life. And it made me reflect and begin to think about, hey, how am I investing? How am I using? How am I going to leverage these remaining years that God has given me on planet Earth? And this is the good news, right? As we think about the fact that tents are temporary, verse 4 reminds us is that he says this, in other words, our tent is swallowed up, what? Not by death, but by life that we know in Jesus Christ. You see, we get the fullness of life. In other words, there's something greater for every single one of us, more than we could ever imagine, that's found in a relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, here's the question I want to ask you today. Have you ever noticed this? That nothing in the world can permanently satisfy your soul. I'm talking about nothing. Nothing actually, makes you whole and satisfied. Which means that you and I were created, I believe, for something beyond this world. In fact, listen to C.S. Lewis's quote on this. He says, if we find ourselves with a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world. Now think about that. There is joy in this world. Every single person, believer and unbeliever, experiences what we call common grace. Now, common grace is sweet to all people, but the world doesn't have the ability to bring permanent satisfaction, to bring permanent joy and wholeness to each and every one of our lives. In fact, it has no ability to bring that permanent satisfaction that we all crave. That's why Paul says that when we die, verse 4, that our tents, they actually get swallowed up by life. You see, life, true life, is being in the presence of God. A home that's built by His hands, and knowing that we get to make everything, or He specifically is making everything right. Paul goes on to say in verse 5, He who has prepared us for this very thing is God, who has given us the Spirit as a guarantee. You see, God created us, God fashioned us, not to be temporary beings, but eternal beings. So you and I will spend eternity somewhere. Eternity is a reality. Now here's the good news. What we see in this text is that we have been given the Holy Spirit. And because we have the Holy Spirit, because Christ is in us, the Spirit of God is in us, we don't have to freak out about dying one day. In fact, for the Christian, death doesn't swallow us up. The exact opposite happens. Life swallows us up. Now, I think very specifically about COVID-19 and this crazy season, right? One of the great fears out there is that men and women are going to die at an unreasonable rate. And yet, here's the reality. None of us should be afraid of dying. That doesn't mean we live carelessly or don't take precautions. But the point is that why are we so afraid to die? To further this point, I just think about this. Death is something difficult for many people to talk about. to talk about, hey, when that happens or what that looks like. And I want to encourage, as followers of Jesus Christ, I don't want to be morbid or weird in any way, but death ought to be something natural and easy for us to talk about. Not that we're looking forward to it, but because we know that our future and our home is eternal and it's secure one day. Now, let's look at verse 6. So we are always, he says, to be of good courage. We know that while we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord. Right? We're always of good courage. We have good courage. Why? Because when we're in this body, right, we are to be away from the Lord. Always confident and know here. And then verses 7 and 8, for we walk by what? Faith, not by sight. Yes, we are of good courage, and we would rather be away from the body and at home with the Lord. And you see, we're confident then to know this, that if we're not in this tent, then we're in a permanent place built by the very hands of God. Now, that's great news because it's something as a follower of Christ, that we can have absolute confidence in. Now, you may be here today and go, okay, how do we know for sure? You know what? That's a great question, and that's what we're exploring during this What's After ATX series as we talk about what happens when you die and what happens after life. As I think about that fair question, it brought me back to one of my favorite subjects, college football, right? A lot of things bring me back to either college football or food, and it made me think about this. And the question is this, what's the worst that you've ever been beaten, like the score-wise, right? As I think about that, there were two universities, two colleges, Cumberland College in Tennessee and also Georgia Tech. And at that time, they were not the Yellow Jackets, but it was the Georgia Tech Engineers. Okay, that was appropriate. The year was 1916, and they played a football game against one another. Now, here's the backstory on that story. Georgia Tech beat Cumberland College 220-0, right? Check out the scoreboard, right? 220-0. We're talking football here, right? This is crazy to think about. Now, the backstory is this, is that just the season before, they had played each other, the two schools had played each other in baseball. And the same coach for football was the same one for baseball, and he was hurt at Georgia Tech because they got spanked by a smaller college. And so the story goes is that John Heisman, the coach of Georgia Tech, ran up the score, and he did it deliberately to 220, all right, to mirror the 22-0 spanking that he got in baseball the season before, right? Interesting story. John Heisman is actually the guy that the Heisman Trophy is named after. That's just for free, little trivia. But here's the deal. This is a scoreboard that tells us a story that can't be denied. Georgia Tech absolutely destroyed, right? Complete annihilation and destruction of Cumberland College. Now, that would be great of Christianity if we had a scoreboard, right? If we had a scoreboard that just kind of told us what the score was and something that defined the events of human history. And men and women, I believe that we actually do. Just last month, we celebrated the event that has changed everything for all of history. And as Christians, we believe that the resurrection, the empty tomb of Jesus Christ changes everything. Because He defeated sin, death, hell, and the grave, that you and I can walk in newness of life and have fulfillment both in this life and eternity in the next one. You see, Jesus just didn't teach about death or have a philosophy about death or write a book. No, what did He do? He faced death and He didn't dodge it, right? He walked through it and He went through it and He rose again. And those of us who believe in that follow Him as Christians, and we know that we can have complete confidence because Jesus has conquered sin, death, hell, and the grave. That's good news for us today. Now, here's the reason that the empty tomb is our scoreboard. It's because Jesus walked through death. Jesus walked through death and He defeated it. And so the reality is, so can we, right? You and I can do the exact same thing. Hebrews chapter 2, verses 14 through 15 say it this way. Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, He Himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death He might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. You see, men and women, you don't have to worry if you're a follower of Jesus, because the tomb of Jesus is empty. And He has conquered all things, giving us life over death through the empty tomb. Now, one day, here's the deal. Your tent and my tent will be destroyed, and all of our lives on this earth will end. But here's the reality for all of us this morning. Our lives do not have to end at our physical death. You see, Christ faced death and defeated it so that when your tent is destroyed, you can step into eternal life with Him in heaven. You see, you were created for something greater than you're currently experiencing right now, and much greater than death itself. Now, here's the question I want us to focus on as we close out today together. How can you focus on the greater life that God has planned for you? How can you focus on the greater life that God has planned for you? I think you have one or two options. The first option is this. Either death will destroy you, all right, and it will. Either death will destroy you, or Jesus will destroy death for you. Either death will destroy you, or Jesus will destroy death for you. You see, the only difference is what you do personally with Jesus. And so I invite you today to consider, as we know that eternity is a reality, to consider, hey, what do I do with Jesus? What do I believe about Him? Now, here's the good news. If you belong to Jesus, if you believe in Jesus, it's an opportunity and an occasion to celebrate. That's why funerals are not sad occasions for those who believe in Jesus, right? For families who come together to celebrate loved ones who call themselves followers of Jesus, because we know this is not the end, right? This is not the end. But if you're confused about that, and you don't know what to do, or you're worried, or death paralyzes you with fear, I want to encourage you to look and see what Jesus has done personally for you, and what a relationship with Him could do, not only for the future for you, but here and now. Now, here's what I know. This is going to be a fun series, right? It's going to be an incredible series as we unpack the reality of eternity. Talking about what happens when we die, what's after life, and looking at the one and out of every 25 people, right? Literally millions of people who've had near-death experiences, who've lived, cheated death to come back to say, hey, I could see on the other side and know that there's something greater. And if you're skeptical today, we invite you to join us, right? We invite you to lean in a new way. We encourage you to invite your friends that need to hear this series, men and women that you want to talk about the gospel with and eternity and what's after this life. It's going to be an incredible series. Now, if you've lost someone, maybe recently in the last weeks or days or months, man, we just want to know, we want you to know that we're praying for you, right? I pray that you'd be encouraged and comforted today, knowing that this life is not the end. And then lastly, if you're confused and you're going, man, I just don't know what I believe, I pray that this series brings clarity for you, that you would discover and learn new things so that you could have confidence and that you could have permanent joy and satisfaction in your life. Hey, church family, so glad that you've chosen to join us today. I look forward to diving into these truths together in the weeks ahead.